Welcome to Huddle Up with Matias Bueno. Today's guest, very special, all the way down from Duval County, Scott Kornberg, the play-by-play broadcaster of the Jacksonville Jumbo Shrimp. Scott, thanks for joining me on today's episode. I'm super excited to get back to Floridian things and talking about all sports surrounding the great city of Jacksonville.
Matthias, thank you for having me. It's awesome to talk with you. We were talking before this, and your love of Jacksonville. I mean, it's super cool. So anything to talk, jumbo shrimp with somebody who's got just a passion for the city, I'm looking forward to it.
You are someone that has traveled all across the United States for work. You went to school in Maryland. You were in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. You had traveled to, Davenport. You've been to Salem, North Carolina. You've been to all these different places. Now you're in Jacksonville. You've been here for a few years, and the team has had the best success that it's experienced in the last 3 years since you've been here. Maybe a bit of a good luck charm. How do you compare living in Jacksonville to some of the other many places you've been along the stops in your career so far?
Well, it's actually funny you bring that up because yesterday we were waiting for the bus in the hotel lobby, and I was talking to one of our pitchers about traveling. And I said, yeah, I've been to 46 states, and they just were not really impressed by that. So at least somebody gets that. But Jacksonville's great. It is like the perfect blend of a big city, obviously with the beaches nearby and some national parks nearby and some history. Obviously, people in Jacksonville love to tout their small town feel. So the the great thing about living there is I came from these smaller markets and was hoping to get to a bigger place, and we really kind of found the perfect one. My wife and I were living in Jacksonville when we got married. We got married in my wife's hometown in Iowa, though. We will have two kids born in Jacksonville by a month or two from this point. So it's obviously a really special place, but I think people have a passion for the city. And I think you've obviously picked up on that, being even though you're in Winnipeg, like people really care about Jacksonville. And from a baseball perspective, those smaller markets, I mean, it's like classic minor league baseball. Some people care about the baseball team, but most people really are just there for the promotions and the cheap beer and the fireworks and the crazy games on the field. And certainly there's a huge role in that, but there are people who really care. Like, they live and die with the Jaguars. They really care that we are a AAA team now. They really care that the Icemen just had a great run in the playoffs. And I think that's what makes Jacksonville special, is that people really care about the city, and not just the sports team, but the city in general. And so we've loved living in it. Certainly nice to get to a bigger place, and Jacksonville's got everything you could possibly imagine. And I think, from a family perspective, it's just been incredible for us.
I'm sure that you wouldn't trade the weather for anything in the world, especially when you consider, being a native of New Jersey and having went to school in Maryland on the Northeast coast. It must be nice to have sunny, hot weather, but maybe sometimes not too hot. I know in September there can be some scorchers there in the Jaguar season openers.
Yeah, so that is the point of contention with my wife, because she's not a warm weather person, like super warm weather. So these summer months are tough. But then it's October and November and December, January, and it's 70 degrees, and I think, man, this is peak Florida. So that's the big thing. Like, growing up in New Jersey, so I grew up in the New York area. My dad worked in the city. I did some internships in the city. Went to New York quite a bit, actually, like at least like a couple times a month. So I actually had a doctor in New York. I have a cleft lip and palate, so I had a special doctor in New York City. So I went there all the time. And that's the great thing about Jacksonville, is it kind of recaptures that big city feel that some of the small areas that I've been. Well, I have great dear places in my heart. It was a great learning curve for me to try to put myself in other cultures and learn different things about other areas. And Jacksonville's a lot more like home than those other areas, but I'm really grateful to have spent time in all of them.
You said that you've been to 46 states. There's only four you haven't been to. What are the four?
Yeah, well, the obvious ones, Hawaii and Alaska. And then I have not been to the Pacific Northwest, so Washington and Oregon. and I've just heard great things. That's our pitcher, Jeff Brigham, is from Federal Way, Washington, so outside Seattle. So we were talking about Seattle, and I said that's one of the few places we haven't gone to, and he said it was a good city, not great. I've heard really great things about it, but those are the four on my list.
If you had the choice as to the order in which of those you would knock down, what would be your order of the four?
Ooh, that's a good question. My best friend actually lives in Hawaii now. His wife is in the Coast Guard, so that has to be number one to see my friend Tim. Then I probably would say, boy, if I'm going to rank them, people from one place are going to be upset, but it's like it's number four, but it's really high up still. I'd probably say Alaska because it's just so beautiful. Then I would probably say Washington to get to a Mariners game. And then Oregon, I feel bad because I've heard just incredible things about Oregon. Like Portland is supposed to be this amazing city. I do have a high affinity for Damian Lillard. He's one of my favorite basketball players of all time. I tweet about him always. But yeah, I got to the people in Oregon. It's not fourth, like out of four. It's really like fourth out of 60 places that I would love to go to. I just have heard amazing things. So I have to rank them in that order, but it's like really like 1A, 1B, 1C, 1D.
And how have you made your travels across almost every state in America? Has it all been through work with different teams along the East Coast and all the stops you've made in your broadcasting journey?
So that's part of it. Like Utah, for example, is not a place that I went to on my own. It was a place that when I was at Western Illinois, we had a college football playoff game at Weber State. And so, okay, I go to Utah. We played Montana State. Okay, like I went to Montana. But my family, when I was a kid, we just did a bunch of like road trips. That was our thing that we would do. And so like when I say I've been to states, I'm not talking about like, okay, I've driven through it. Like, no. I have been to that. Like I've gotten out of the car and we've eaten a meal or we've done things or we stayed there. But that was the beauty of road trips was like, you don't have a lot of reasons a lot of the time to go to Arkansas. And it's one of those classic flyover states. But we were just driving. We have family in Dallas, so we would drive from New Jersey all the way to Dallas. And we're in Arkansas, and we're like, oh man, like Hot Springs National Park. That sounds really cool. Like, let's stop off. And we stayed the night there, and we it was cool. Like, and that's what the great thing about driving is the fact that if there was something that we saw on the highway randomly like that, we would stop and we would do it. And um, we did trips New Jersey to Texas. We did one where we flew to Texas, spent a few days with my family, and then drove west through New Mexico. We stopped in Santa Fe, which is, my gosh, what a gorgeous place. And then we stopped obviously at some of the national parks in New Mexico and Arizona, and eventually got to the Grand Canyon, which was incredible. And so some of it is work. Um, but some of it is the fact that I love traveling like myself. Like I'll just drive. When I was at Western Illinois and my best friend was in he's a Michigan State alum and he would go back to East Lansing every year. And like I was like, hey, I'm gonna go to like we didn't have a basketball game at the time, and I was like, hey, I'm gonna meet you in East Lansing. So I drove from Illinois to Michigan, which is not a far drive, but it was again like anything to see something cool or to see a place. My brother went to the University of Wisconsin, so that was pretty easy for me to knock off after that, and that's a really cool state. And the rest of them, like it's just oftentimes it's just driving and we stop by, or I have traveled for work, or we have family there. There's always a reason, and I think that's what makes the United States so great. And Canada too, is there's a lot of different places, right? There's so many different areas. Like New Mexico, I got there's never a place I thought about going, and now I think it's like the most beautiful place and region in the country. And Wyoming, like I spent a week in Jackson Hole, and that was like just like enchanting. I think it was the word I would use, like with the Grand Tetons. And obviously the northeastern cities are just super cool. The history behind them is amazing. But I love that part of this job. Like right now I'm in Norfolk, Virginia, and we got here from Scranton, Pennsylvania yesterday, and people probably don't circle those on on a map, but like Scranton is the first off, my grandfather was from about 20 minutes away from there, so that was really cool. Secondly, the office, obviously, super cool. But like that's a place you can't tell the story of America without. Like that is like the birth of the railroad and the coal mines and the rise of that in the 1800s, and obviously the decline after World War One, really. The immigration part of that city, like you can't tell the story of America without that. And it's weird because you don't think about it, right? Like you think about American Revolution and the Civil War and other things, but like that is like truly like, a beacon of America. And it was really cool to spend some time there. And so now we're in Norfolk, which is a great Navy town. Obviously very cool for us to be in as well. But that's a great part of this job. And I'm lucky that I like this part. And that's really because my parents love traveling as well.
When you travel across the many states of America, obviously, as you mentioned, there's ones that people believe are marquee or the ones you can't miss. Hawaii, I think, would also be up there amongst those top five, top 10 states you have to visit. And you mentioned some other ones that maybe weren't necessarily on your calendar. So, how would you rank or group maybe the five most underrated states or ones that you think are hidden gems in America for people to go to? You'd mentioned a few already in Arkansas and New Mexico, but what other ones do you think are hidden gems that people should really, pay more attention to than they probably do right now?
That's a great question. All right. I always tell people my most underrated city, I've told this to my dad a bunch of times, is Kansas City. The food is extraordinary. That's the great thing about traveling, right? You get to try all the food. The barbecue is incredible. It is, and I've had North Carolina barbecue, I've had Texas barbecue, I've had Memphis barbecue. Nothing comes close to Kansas City. The city itself is fantastic. You've got like a really cool downtown. They've got a plaza area, which is great for shopping. You've got two great, well, one ballpark, one stadium to watch games, and like the Chiefs game it was awesome. Kansas City Royals have a beautiful ballpark. Then from a history perspective, it has the only World War One museum in the nation, and it is simply incredible. And then the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum, obviously for me, like a huge nerdy person, it's amazing. But I've taken my friends who are not baseball fans there, and they loved it. And so like that is something that, talking about American history, that is a huge part of American history. And finally, these Negro Leaguers are getting the credit that they deserve. But to me, that's like the most hidden gem city that I've been to is Kansas City. So I know you asked for a quick list. I had to explain that one really fast. Jackson Hole, I think, would be up there for me. I thought that was, I think it is like a place that people go to, but still Wyoming, it's still out there, it's still gorgeous. I would say Santa Fe, like you can't, the colors there, like just with the architecture that they use, and obviously just the natural way that the scenery is in the Southwest. It really is incredible. I loved every second of that. So I would say those three. Let's see, where else would be a good hidden gem? I should have prepared for this more. Let me say, is like Denver like a hidden gem? Like I don't think so. Like people are realizing that Denver is like really great and the prices are shooting up, right? So let me say, can I come back to you on that? Let me think about this as
Yeah,
we
for sure,
continue
for
to chat
sure.
for the last two.
I have heard one of my close friends is a Tennessee Titans fan, and he actually traveled down to Kansas City with one of his other friends, and they heard that the nickname of Tennessee is the Kansas City barbecue understudy because of how much they try to mimic the great smorgasbord of food and especially barbecue that is available on the west border of Missouri.
You know what? It is very true. I actually think that Kansas City barbecue might have got it from Memphis. I have to look that up. But or vice versa. Either way, like yes, they've been trying. Memphis has good barbecue. It's all dry rub based though, so you have to like that kind of style. And Kansas City, I mean, they have the sauce, but it's just they cook it so perfectly that you don't need the sauce, but it is delicious. The best place is this place called Joe's Kansas City, which is actually in a gas station. But I've had ribs there, I've had brisket, I've had this thing called a Z-Man sandwich. It's like a brisket sandwich with toasted provolone and an onion ring. And that's simply incredible. So if anyone's traveling to Kansas City, I'd recommend that place. Or Q38 is another good one. Great city.
Winnipeggers often take trips down to Fargo, or, Bismarck, Grand Forks, North Dakota, because that's the closest place in the US that we can travel to. And oftentimes you mention, oh, this restaurant is in a gas station. It's such a cliche, but like a cozy cliche of the Midwest, I feel, where people often expect like the Nobu and the big super fancy restaurant in LA that doesn't have a reservation spot open till 4 a.m. But those places off the interstate where there's just nothing but straight roads, sometimes I find are the best places that you can go to stop to eat.
Oh my gosh, yeah. Well, Fargo, you know what? Let me put Fargo on that list. That is an underrated gem. We went there every year for basketball and every other year for football for North Dakota State when Western Illinois would play there. The downtown is awesome. And every place you could go to is a great restaurant. And the Bison fans are, I mean, they're as good of fans as anybody in any team in any sport. I mean, they are there showing out, selling out every game. Their team is amazing, which helps every single year, particularly in football. But that is a great city. I am a big Fargo fan. That's a hidden gem, I would say. North Dakota is beautiful. I would love to go to to there more and explore like some of the national parks there. Like my brother went to the Black Hills and in the Dakotas and loved it. And I'm reading a book right now about Crazy Horse and Custer. So Crazy Horse obviously was a really amazing Native American warrior. Not that far, I'm about a quarter into it, but takes place really through Wyoming and the Dakotas. I'll say Buffalo as well, hidden gem. Go to a Bills game. That's the best place to watch. They're the best fans. They are. They are the best fans. And I went to a Bills game in 2014, so they were not good. It was that run in which they were just awful for 2 decades pretty much, and nobody sat down the entire game. Like, and they lost. They lost by like 10 to the Chiefs, who weren't good at the time either. So it was like a really like meaningless game. And like the people there care so much. The restaurants also in Buffalo are great. Obviously the wings, but beef on weck. So let me put that as a hidden gem city. Niagara Falls obviously is gorgeous to see as well. So that's part of it. And if you can get to a Bills game, it's a bonus. But yeah, you're right. The best restaurants are the ones that are kind of off the beaten path. And I'll have to see if I can find any on our road trip here in Norfolk.
Living in Toronto, a lot of people travel down to Buffalo, and especially with the affiliation of the Bisons to the Blue Jays and Niagara Falls and its proximity, a lot of people I know when it comes to talking about major pro sports North America, like cities in North America, the ones that obviously that always get touted are the New Yorks, Los Angeles, Chicago's, but the ones that are seen as the measliest or the smallest, oftentimes people throw in cities like Winnipeg or Buffalo or Jacksonville or Milwaukee or Charlotte. And I find that even if they are the smallest markets, it's not always fair for people who haven't been there to rip on them or to say, oh, well, that's just a dusty place. Who would ever travel there? Because when you go to those places, mentioning North Dakota, I'm sure by many Americans is seen as an unknown place, or Wyoming, who goes there? But as we've just talked about, there's so many great things and so much history involved in many of these cities, especially when you consider you have been in Buffalo, you live, and work out of Jacksonville, traveling on the road. Like, there are so many great features to these cities. And I think that charm is what makes the fandom in those cities that much more unique, because in Chicago, New York, or LA, the teams are so big that it's almost like a clothing brand more than it is a sports team. Whereas in Jacksonville, if you're there, everyone loves the Jaguars or follows the Jumbo Shrimp or I guess they did follow the Suns before the Iceman. Whereas in New York, yeah, everyone loves the teams. Their fans are passionate, but it's so big that it's hard to find that like that unique charm to the fandom, which again, to each their own, but I think that that's what makes some of those smaller cities more special.
Yeah, I think you hit it on the head. And listen, we know we are the minor league baseball team here in Jacksonville, right? And we know we cannot compete with the NFL team across the parking lot. But I think that's also what makes it special is there's a lot of camaraderie between, in particular, the Jumbo Shrimp, the Jaguars, and Iceman, and that we're not competing with it. Like it's a really good relationship with every single team. Like the Jaguars reached out to us to see if Doug Peterson could throw out a first pitch. Obviously we do stuff with them, and the Iceman, we have a partnership with them every year, and that's what makes it great. But I mean, I think you hit it on the head is that, like, okay, we know we're the minor league baseball team. The Icemen know that they're the minor league hockey team, and the Jaguars are number one, for nearly everybody in the city. And that's what makes it really cool is that people, really are living and dying with them. And, you hope with a new head coach and everything else, that it seems like a really good offseason that they've had, that they're going to be able to put it all together and really build something special. And I think they can. Because I wasn't here when they were amazing, and I think it was 2017.
Mhm.
I came in the next year, November 2018 is when I moved to Jacksonville. But people say like it's just it's a special city to begin with, but it's really, really, the vibe is amazing when they're good. And I think that they're going to put something together here. And I'm really excited to see it. And you're right, that is what makes it special, is because, you know, people care that OTAs, are going on, and they're going to care that what Trevor Lawrence is doing to build in his rookie year, in the offseason. And they're going to care when they're in the Hall of Fame game for Tony Baselli in the preseason. And that's awesome. Like that, we love that. That makes us look good when the Jaguars are good. So we're rooting for those guys as well. Super hard. And it is really, really cool to see them go through a season and to see that, despite they've had trouble obviously the last couple decades, that people still really care in Jacksonville is awesome. I think those people are really going to be rewarded for sticking with those guys.
I have only been in Jacksonville for a short span of time, and you did unfortunately miss the boat just by 1 year on the 2017 Magical Ride. Have you been to many Jaguars games before?
Yes. So I actually work in their PR department on game day. So I go every week. I'm there. And it is awesome. It's those people, there has not been a lot of easy PR stuff the last few years, and it's nothing of their doing, right? It's some people that were maybe bad hires, like a head coach and whatever, and losing. But those people are incredible to work for, and they do an amazing job, because some of the stuff that they've had to deal with, they've handled it with the utmost class and professionalism, and that's what it is like to work there. And so, my full-time job year round is with the Jumbo Shrimp. I do that because I want to keep learning from people who I think are the best in the business, and like those guys in their PR department are 100% like they're the best, and it's been incredible for me to do that. It's really cool to go every week. Get to do it's a cool job. You get to go now. Right now with COVID, a little bit different, but like you're going to used to be in the locker rooms and just trying to like get sound and transcribe that for media after the game, obviously helping with stuff before and during the game as well. Things pop up, but it's a really great experience, and it's really cool as a fan. So I'm there every week, not in the stands, but I'm with you guys every week.
Do you have a favorite memory from any particular game that you've worked before, or one that sticks out?
Ooh. Um, Let me think here. I would say when the Chargers were here in 2019, Philip Rivers was pretty interesting, and that was when we were still allowed to go into the locker room. So right now, that instead of that, they just bring up players for a post game press conference. But at the time, I was doing like a visiting team, and now they have me with the home team, at least this last year. And he was pretty funny. I think they had won, and he was pretty boisterous in the locker room after the game, and he said some like pretty crazy stuff. Some of it I can't really repeat, but that was one that I was like, Philip Rivers is a great quarterback, but also he was like hilarious. He had a great personality, really good back and forth with the beat reporters from them, and so I think that probably um, sticks out a little bit. Obviously, when the Saints were there and Drew Brees was very cool. I think it was a preseason game, maybe or early in the year. I can't remember, but that was also very cool because he's just a legendary quarterback, and those two probably stand out.
Former teammates as well, no less,
Yeah,
between Breeze and
exactly.
Rivers.
What is crazy? Actually, the other cool thing was last year, I think the 49ers stat person, for some reason, couldn't come on the trip or something, maybe got sick. They asked me to do stats for their radio team during the game, and that was very cool. So I stood in between, their broadcasters and like literally, which is write down on a notepad like things I noticed, and that was very cool. The first drive of the game was not cool for Jaguars fans because it took the entirety of the first quarter. And it was an NFL record for regular season, and their play-by-play guy was like, "Are you sure? Like this is a record?" I looked it up on Google. The only other time it's been beat was in the Giants and Vikings in the playoffs. Um, that was really neat experience to see how those two guys work back and forth. They were really good. Obviously, it was not a great game for the Jaguars. The 49ers rolled. But that was a neat thing. I'm trying to build to that level. And that was certainly a passion of mine in that kind of role. And it's nice that the Jaguars, they recognize that. They know my background. And when the 49ers needed somebody, they thought of me. And that's really, really incredibly kind of them.
The grind as a sports broadcaster can take many years, but enjoying the journey along the way is advice people are always given. And it seems that you have enjoyed the journey along the way very much so, considering the different destinations you've been to and the different teams you've worked with, and especially in the different sports. Now, I must ask, as someone who grew up in New Jersey, was there a specific sports team or sport that you feel more aligned with than the different ones that you've had an opportunity to work with?
So I think people think like New York area, and you probably, I mean, I think at least I do, like the first team you come to mind with is the Yankees, just because they're so successful. I was not a Yankees fan as a kid. I was a Mets fan. Um, Baseball is special in my family. My grandma and grandfather were huge Brooklyn Dodgers fans. Then they left, and they were so upset they didn't watch baseball for like 20 years. And then my dad was born in 1960, and my uncle a couple years after that. My dad is a Mets fan. My uncle is a Yankees fan, and they got my grandparents to root, or my uncle got my grandparents to root for the Yankees, and not the Mets, which is obviously the arch enemy of the Brooklyn Dodgers. But I think going back to that point, and certainly like the history, and my grandparents when they lived in New York, they had Brooklyn Dodgers stuff everywhere in their house. Like, and it was, I mean, that really mattered to them. Obviously, the Yankee stuff too, but that was like part of their decor. Was like model like Ebbets Field, like model Yankee Stadium, like old things like that. It was really cool. And then like some of those road trips I mentioned, I would go with my dad and my brothers, and we just hit different ballparks. So our goal is to get to all 30 major league ones. I've been to about 2/3. So I think just playing baseball. I mean, I played baseball and basketball as a kid. Believe it or not, I was a decent basketball player. But yeah, I mean, baseball I think is always special for me. Basketball is really good in the New York area. It's a really, really good um kind of like, I don't know, setup. I don't know how you want to put that, but like I played in the same AAU program as like Jay Williams, the guy who played at Duke and for the Bulls before he got hurt, and Luol Deng. I was a lower level team, but in that same program. And the basketball is really good. I think I have a huge passion for basketball and the rhythm of the game. So like I love baseball is my favorite sport, but basketball is certainly like right behind it. And I loved calling college basketball because you really got, Western Illinois is never made the NCAA tournament. And we didn't do it when I was there. They still haven't done it since. But you love the fact that you had a chance, right? Like in theory, even though we were the last seed, oftentimes in the Summit League tournament, like we could have won. We did one year, could have, won our way to the NCAA tournament. And I love that fact about basketball. I love the rhythm of basketball, the pace, the back and forth, um, just the off the court stuff, like the way that practices go and teams are set up, like with meals and everything, is really cool. Um, Baseball, similar thing, like you're playing every day. You love the rhythm of the season and the fact that you're going to win 7, 8, 9 games in a row, but you can't get too high, and you're going to lose, around that in a row, and you can't get too low. And I love that about baseball. I love that it takes 162 games in the major leagues. I love that it takes 150 in the minor leagues, because you really do know who's the best at that point. And those two, I think in particular, because I played them, because of my family background. Football is obviously big too, but it's probably my third favorite sport, because I love baseball and basketball so much. And I've been very blessed in my career to have called all three of those sports, among others, but certainly those top two are very near for my family history, and also just for, growing up as a kid, I just loved baseball and basketball.
As a baseball broadcaster, you're working almost every single day at a game compared to football or basketball, where there's like a few games a week, and in football, there's only one game a week. You mentioned that you have worked in those three sports. So, which of the schedules and pacing of each of the sports do you prefer, or do you like them all equally? And there's pros and cons that cancel out pretty fairly.
So yeah, there's certainly pros and cons to it. I love the fact, like baseball wise, like I like the fact that you can't get too high, you can't get too low, right? Like your momentum is only as good as your next day's starting pitcher. And so, you prepare differently for all of them. Whereas football, I mean, every week is so important. Like, if you saw how coaches were and players on the inside, like, A, gearing up for a game, and B, afterwards, win or loss. I mean, it's a really emotional sport, and you cannot bring that into baseball. You wouldn't make it out of April. You would just like, you would end up just having a breakdown, really, because it just, with one game, only 11 or 12 in college, obviously 17 in the NFL. There's so much weight to them, and there's so much pressure to them. I think that's why I see coaches go so crazy some of the time. And that was cool, because you spend so much time preparing during the week, going to practice. Like, like I think I probably would spend like a ridiculous amount of time for only like a 4-hour broadcast, 5-hour broadcast. And then, you go, and you don't use most of the stuff, but you've got it there. And basketball is kind of a nice mix of the two, in that you're playing like 2 times a week, really. And so there is that pressure. There are 30 games in college, 35 games if you're really good. And but there is like a little bit more weight. Whereas like baseball players, like if we lose, I think we had like a 5 or 6 game losing streak recently, and like, they just move on, just go to the next day, because there's 100 plus more games to go at this point. Not that they don't care, like they want to win, but again, like you just know that's a part of the sport. And basketball is like that nice mix of the two. Um, the funny thing is that the dress is different in every sport. Like basketball, you see the games, not as much anymore, but like used to be like everyone's wearing suits, but they would dress the worst outside of basketball. Like, yeah, there's in sweatsuits like the whole time. You go out to a restaurant as a team, you're in a sweatsuit. You go out to, you're on the bus, you're in a sweatsuit. You're in a hotel watching film, you're in a sweatsuit. Like, it's like, that's just what you do. Baseball, they're really well dressed for flights, buses, or whatever. We just busted here from Pennsylvania, you just kind of jeans kind of thing. It's a, like a nice, it is a mix. Like people go all out in the flights, like they want to look good in the airports. But if you're just on a bus, it's not like super casual like basketball, but it's casual. Football is like no matter what, you wear a polo and khakis kind of thing. So that's the weirdest thing that always threw me off about that stuff. I always felt like I had 3 different dress codes during the year when I was at Western Illinois in the football basketball season, and then Myrtle Beach for baseball. but it is, every sport is really different, and you have to recognize like the weight that each game plays. Obviously, the preparation that you have is different for each, because you can't prepare so much. I mean, you obviously prepare for a broadcast every night for baseball, but you can't put in 50, 60 hours like you would for a football game, because that time just doesn't exist. And basketball is kind of like the happy medium. I don't know if that's an interesting or long-winded, boring answer, but that's the difference, I think, in those three.
Is there a dress code or a style that you prefer in terms of preparation between any of the three?
You know what? I like dressing up. I miss basketball from that. I get to do some JU basketball for Phil and stuff. It's very nice of them to ask. I like dressing up. So you don't really do that for baseball, but I do like the suit attire. I like looking good and trying to bring it. So that's one of the things I do miss about basketball.
Now, as someone who's broadcasted multiple sports, versatility is important. And as much as kids growing up watch sports and play sports and are influenced by it, broadcasters also grow up influenced by those that they see and watch on television. Growing up as a kid, and even still to this day, who are some of the broadcasters that you look up to?
That's a good question. So the first one that's going to come to mind as a kid would be Gary Cohen. Listening to Matt, like there was no TV at the time, so it was just radio. And again, we're always on. I just told you like earlier, we're doing a lot of road trips, right? So we're always listening to games. And he was the Mets radio guy before he now is the Mets TV guy on SNY. And I think that, probably more than anybody else, he's probably been the biggest influence, because it was such a huge part of my childhood. Like, A, I was a huge baseball fan. B, he's simply a fantastic broadcaster, and he's only gotten better. And I've gotten the chance to meet him, and that was a thrill. Um, Very, very cool. Because I look at him and like on this pedestal as like, I think he's the best broadcaster in baseball right now. And I don't really think it's particularly all that close. And he was just a huge influence, and his passion for baseball, the fact that you've got the rhythms, but he's able to rise for the big moment. Like, he gets it when you need to get to that big level. And it's not always like when the Mets went to the World Series in 2000, it was, when they had an 11-run inning against the Braves, and like, it was a middle of summer game, but he meets the moment. And I think what's underrated and really important as a broadcaster is like, he was like me, like sitting in the upper deck at Shea Stadium going to games, and he gets it. He gets what it's like to be a Mets fan. And I think that's why he's so beloved by that fan base, is that he was one of them, and he understands, some of the really high moments the franchise has had and some of the really low moments the franchise has had. And he's able to articulate that so well. I think that's an underrated aspect of being a broadcaster is getting the fan base. And it is interesting in minor league baseball, like, what do you do with that? Because you're coming into a new city, and the emphasis on wins and losses isn't as high, because it is development, but it does matter, right? And that's why I think, like, from a Jacksonville perspective, we've really tried to get into the history of this city with baseball, which dates back to the 1800s, which is really neat. Anyway, but I think that was a huge influence, is that he's able to meet the moment. He's so good at description, but he gets it. And so many broadcasters have that aura, like, oh, like it's just something that they think that they're bigger than, and they're not. Like, you're there because people care, and he gets it that people really care. I don't know if I'm putting that right, but I think that he does that better than anybody. Howie Rose is the Mets radio guy now, is a huge part of my childhood, obviously listening to him. Again, somebody who understands the importance of relating to the fan base, because he was a kid who sat in the upper deck at Shea Stadium, and that was like how he grew up. Ian Eagle is an amazing broadcaster, and that I think I'm really grateful to have grown up where I did, because it's not like now there was no social media. The highlights weren't all over the place. There was no TV of all these games. Like, you're listening to a lot of them on the radio. If there was TV, it's only local TV, really. There maybe was one national game of the week. And so I was really fortunate to have grown up in a place where they had so many great broadcasters. And Ian Eagle came obviously as the Nets broadcaster, but he does CBS, and he oftentimes was assigned the Jets games. Um, a guy who, his memory is incredible. And you talk about meeting the moment. Nobody does that in any sport better than Ian Eagle. The way he's able to do that for basketball, the way he uses his voice, his inflection, his sense of humor is really incredible. So he was a big part of it. Al Michaels is somebody who I think if Ian Eagle's number one for me for football, Al Michaels is a very close second. Certainly someone who has had an amazing career and getting kind of a cool opportunity with Amazon now, which is neat. So that's been awesome. And otherwise, kind of funny, because I grew up in the 90s, and obviously there's no MLB at Bat app. We got MLB Network when I was in college. And so I was like back home doing an internship, and I don't think I was doing anything one night. I think I was just sitting on the couch. And I'd always heard about people telling me about Vin Scully because I wanted broadcasting and blah, blah, blah. And I never listened to Vin Scully. My grandparents are Brooklyn Dodgers fans and obviously listened to him and talked about him. And so they had MLB Network, and it was they just simulcast the home team feed. So it was Padres at Dodgers. And I remember sitting thinking to myself, like, you know what? I got nothing else to watch. Let me put on this game, and I'll listen to this Vin Scully guy, and I bet he's going to. I distinctly remember thinking to myself, I bet he's going to suck. And I turned it on. It was in commercial, and it came back, and they showed a full moon. And he didn't say anything at first, and then he said, "Isn't it amazing we put a man up there?" And I was hooked. I thought he was the greatest. I think he is the greatest broadcaster of all time. And I'm like, I would listen to Dodgers games after our games for years, until he retired. Because just the way he tells stories, the information he somehow comes up with, and not always baseball related too. Like one of the times he talked about like Friday the 13th and like why 13 is actually a lucky number. And Doc Emmerich would be another guy like since retired in that legendary category. So those would probably be like my biggest influences. And I'm very grateful to have grown up where I did, because the Mets broadcasters, my favorite team, are amazing. And I learned from them, listening to them. The Nets broadcaster, Ian Eagle, is amazing. And that's my favorite team. And I learned from them. Doc Emmerich's a Devils broadcaster. If I had to pick a hockey team, that would be my team. And like, again, I got so lucky, right? And you throw in like a really great national guy like Al Michaels, and then just the fact that, you've got the best broadcaster of all time is from Brooklyn. And that was my grandparents' team. I just got very, very lucky to have listened to many great ones where I did. And hopefully a tiny bit of that rubbed off on me.
There's a lot of history in many of the names that you just mentioned, especially when you talk about someone like Vin Scully. Growing up myself, I didn't really watch a lot of baseball or pay attention to tons of broadcasters, and the only baseball that I was really exposed to besides major MLB games was like the Winnipeg Goldeyes. So we didn't necessarily have a Vin Scully sitting in the booth, unfortunately, at Shaw Park. But now, as I've gotten into broadcasting, and when you look back at old tapes and listen to Vin Scully's voice, it's so mind-blowing sometimes how he's able to illustrate the scene, and how he's almost like a very refined artist in his craft because of how long he's been involved in the sport. And also because of the fact too, and this is something I think that baseball doesn't always get as much credit for as it should, is that it's basically the oldest sport of the major four. And it's been on the radio longer than most other sports. And there's just so much more history involved in teams and fan bases. And when you think about how long baseball's been in the state of New York and in and around the area, like Brooklyn Dodgers, like that's historic. That stuff doesn't really go away. And that's why you can see that your grandparents were so upset, because that's like in the NFL, people get upset when the St. Louis Rams left the city, but it's like, imagine if they're around for like 60, 70, 80 years before leaving or something like that. Like that's a totally different story.
Yeah. Well, and the fact that the Dodgers, you can't tell baseball history without them, especially the 40s and 50s Brooklyn Dodgers, which is, you're talking about like, okay, the Rams leave, but the St. Louis Rams, I don't think, if I'm remembering correctly, have been very good for a long time, besides the Kurt Warner years. The Brooklyn Dodgers left when they were incredible. I mean, they were winning the pennant every year, and they were going to the World Series, oftentimes losing to the Yankees, except for 1955. But I mean, yeah, they'd been there since the 1800s, like when they were named the Brooklyn Super Bas and the Brooklyn Robins, and they had all these crazy names. And then you have like all these Hall of Famers, and they just leave in the middle of the night like that, really. And that, same thing with the Baltimore Colts. That was a really tough one for those people. Baltimore fans are incredible. Um, and they really truly left in the middle of the night. The Dodgers at least had a slightly more notice, but they are two great fan bases, and St. Louis fans. I mean, that's hard. That's the worst part about sports, is the teams moving, is you do affect people. There's got to be a kid in St. Louis who was a diehard Rams fan, and maybe is turned off to football now because the Rams left because of their ownership and wanting greener pastures in Los Angeles. There's nothing wrong with St. Louis. It's a nice city. Easily could have supported the team for a long time. It's just that LA was the biggest market open, and their owners from there, and obviously saw a way they can make even more money. So that's the really crappy part, is that you leave people behind. I know my grandparents really really hurt when the Dodgers left, because I mean they were so good. They were such a part of the borough. And Baltimore fans still have not forgiven the Colts. Like, if you ever go to Colts Ravens game, like, watch out. Like, that's a wild thing, and their fans are so passionate. So that's it. You lose your innocence a little bit, I guess, with certain things in your life, and you hope it's for, I don't know, I guess maybe you don't hope it's for more serious things, but maybe sports is a good way to lose it compared to some of the other recent events going on in the world, but it still doesn't make it easy. And I can only imagine losing a team like that. Like, that's why Buffalo fans are so good, is because their team was under threat of leaving for years. The people, oh, Buffalo, it's a small city, but they support them so well, and they care. And that's hard. That's really hard.
You're 100% correct. And when you think about even the New Orleans Saints, why it's so emotional with Gleason's punt block touchdown, because the fact that Hurricane Katrina had happened so recently, they almost left to San Antonio. They were on their last dime. Even the other day in school, we were watching a documentary produced by one of our instructors about how the GM and the head coach of the Pittsburgh Penguins in the 80s basically through the season to ensure they could
Mhm.
get Mario Lemieux, because Pittsburgh was dying as a franchise and they almost left town. And people in Pittsburgh are passionate for hockey more than you'd think. And these franchise altering moments really shine through and show the great stories in sports. And those two are definitely at the top of my mind when I think about almost leaving the city, and then something that revives it. And those two are definitely examples of iconic moments in the major four North American pro sports.
No doubt. And think about now how embedded the Saints are to New Orleans, right? I mean, now you can't separate them, and that's why, like, good for LA. They've got the Dodgers, who are the best team in baseball for the last like 10 years, and obviously amazing pockets of run in the 80s and 60s and stuff like that. Um, so they've made out pretty well with the Super Bowl Rams and, and the Dodgers. But yeah, I mean, something that you grow up loving. Think about it as a kid, and all of a sudden that leaves. You can't fault people. That's why, like, the A's are having so much trouble right now, is because the people there think that they're going to move, and there is some credence to that they might move. and so they're not supporting the team. And Tampa Bay, you could argue for a similar thing, and so like I don't blame the fans when they feel like ownership is trying to leave, that they would be hurt by that. And you hope that in the A's case that they could figure it out or they could stay, because the A's are a historic franchise and people do care about the A's. Like they used to draw really well there, and they're and unfortunately, like this year, it's been really rough. And that's the tough part of the business of baseball, is that we look at this as our teams, as they're ours, but the ownerships oftentimes look at it as a money making venture, and they have every right to do that. They bought it for millions and billions of dollars, and unfortunately, those interests don't always often align, where you see teams that aren't spending the money that they should, to get the best players, like the Reds trading away everybody. Like that's another situation where things aren't great right now, but there maybe is no more historic place in America for baseball than Cincinnati. And the fans are having a tough time with that. And so that's the juxtaposition. As a fan, you look at it a certain way, the ownership doesn't. And that's hard, but sometimes they do, and sometimes you're left with like the Mets right now. Like Steve Cohen has revitalized that franchise, and we all know that there's better ownerships than others in all different sports, right? And which ones are the best, and oftentimes it's the teams that are more successful is because the owners care, they're willing to spend the money, they're going to put the best people in the GM and president positions, and not meddle with them. But it's from, if you turn the shoe on its head, it's hard to do that. If you spent millions and billions of dollars, you might want to meddle with it too, or you might want to look at it as, hey, I want to make more money and make some more of it back. So it's a tough thing. That's why ownership matters so much in sports.
Absolutely. And it doesn't always get easy. And especially at the NFL level, you think about the questions surrounding decisions owners have made. And even in Jacksonville, there's no shortage of questions for their owner, Shad Khan. And I think that's something that is it's not always easy for fans to deal with, because if the owner is making money, then there's usually no incentive for them to sell the team. And unfortunately for fans, it doesn't always result in what they're looking for. And when there's that incongruency, it definitely doesn't spell for an enjoyable time within a certain fan base. But when it does, then it's euphoria and it's bedlam. So I see that there's both sides of it, but at the end of the day, like you said before, it's better that this is the thing that's frustrating you or the worst thing in your life, rather than some of the other bad things that are going on in the world right now.
Yeah, obviously this is a tough week. You know, news wise, this last week with what happened in Texas, and hopefully for Shad, take it back to him. This is his chance to maybe stop some of these naysayers. He's obviously a very successful guy. He's interested in developing the city, which is very cool. He's willing to admit he made a mistake with Urban Meyer and move on. Like he could have, I mean, believe it or not, could have kept Urban Meyer, and that would have been a disaster. So hopefully this is his chance. He's obviously been very successful in soccer in Europe. So hopefully this is his chance to really, turn the page, move on from a tough season last year, in which I think he'd be the first to tell you that it was a bad hire, and crazy to me that Fox would want to go after Urban Meyer, but I'm not making those kind of calls. And hopefully he'll prove that he'll be a good owner here for Jacksonville and start to build a sustainable winner. He hopefully will be able to turn the page there.
Scott, we are getting towards the end of our time on today's episode. So I do want to ask you a few quick wrap-up questions to have a little bit more fun before we go.
Go for it.
Favorite baseball movie of all time?
Bull Durham.
Who was your childhood sports hero for a player?
For player, probably Mike Piazza, my favorite player.
Favorite sports memory from when you were a kid?
That's a good question. So sometimes they all kind of, blend together, like going to games, but certainly like going to games with my parents, and my brothers and my sister. And probably my favorite memory would be actually one that's, I'll say, not baseball related, and that was in 2013 or 2012, excuse me, June 1st. So the anniversary is tomorrow, and Johan Santana's no hitter. So I was interning at WFAN in New York at the time, and I was taking the train in and out of the city with my dad, who works in Midtown as well, or worked in Midtown as well. Now mostly from home, and so we were on the train back, and I mean, it was just really cool. Now I look back and I'm like, man, I wish I still worked in New York for that reason, just to spend more time with them. But we were on the train back, and you're following the game, and the Mets at the time had never thrown a no hitter. And every day, Howie Rose, their radio broadcaster, would, every time they gave him a hit, he'd be like, all right, that's the 7,947th game in a row without a no hitter for the Mets. It was like a thing, because this is a franchise with so much great pitching, and nobody had done a no hitter. People had gone on to throw no hitters for other teams, but none of them in a Mets uniform. And so they're playing the Cardinals, and we're following it on the train. And then we get in the car to drive home from the station, and we're listening to it. And I think that Howie Rose said something like, Santana's up. And he threw a lot of pitches in that game. And I think he was up pretty high, even in like the third or the fourth inning. And he said something like, 70 pitches. It was the third or the fourth inning. That's a lot. And so I said to my dad, I said, even when they might throw a no hitter, their pitcher is not going to be able to make it to the end. So we got home. And my brothers were home as well, and we had pizza, and we're sitting on, I hadn't changed out of my work clothes, and we're just sitting on the couch watching it. It's like the fifth inning, hadn't given up a hit. It's the sixth inning, hadn't given up a hit, and it was a Friday night, and I distinctly remember this. One of my friends who actually just got married last week, she wanted to go to like a party at Rutgers with another one of our friends. Like a whole bunch of our friends were going to hang out Friday night. And she was going to pick me up. And I think in like the sixth or the seventh inning, I told her, or she texted me, hey, can I come in like 15 minutes? And I said, no, I can't leave. She said, why? And I said, I can't tell you. And so then she's like, well, can I what's going on? I said, well, if there's something happening in the Mets game, cannot leave for that. She said, well, can I come over and watch it? I said, no, you cannot come over and watch this game. She was, I think she was pretty frustrated by it. Anyway, so I we're still hadn't changed out of our work clothes. We're still sitting in the same spots on the couch. And he obviously threw that no hitter. And the best part about it, wasn't the fact that the Mets threw a no hitter. It was the fact that, we were together and we did these stupid things, like we didn't get changed and we sat in the same spots at the couch. But, knowing that I was graduating college the next year and moving on to a career that I knew was going to be nomadic, and I wasn't going to be home a lot, that I had that special kind of that last memory with my dad and my brothers of watching sports with them, like on a daily basis. That was the best part, and how much it meant, really, especially to him, because he had seen the entirety of the Mets never throwing a no-hitter. So in their 8,020th game, 10 years ago tomorrow, that's crazy. June 1st, 2012. That is that's probably my favorite memory, was that whole night watching the no-hitter and him actually doing it. And it was, I mean, I get a little emotional thinking about it because of we were just parading around the house saying, let's go Mets and Johan and all that stuff. And that's why you get into this field, because you love sports, and it matters to you, and that passion. And that's why I said earlier, the word I was looking for is some of the broadcasters are jaded. Gary Cohen and Ian Eagle, Howie Rose, those guys are so great because they know what it's like to be in the stands and how much it matters to people, and they're never jaded about it. And I think that's what makes them special more than above anything else, because they work for teams that are historically not great, and yet they never fail to recognize how there are people for a random June 1st day, there are people living and dying, and then able to meet the moment when something happens. And both of their calls for that game were amazing to tie it full circle. So I know you want a quick hitter, but that's probably my favorite one.
Of the major four North American pro sports leagues, which championship, Cinderella championship, do you think is the best in your opinion? Whether it be from NHL, NFL, MLB, or NBA, like a team that no one expected to win, and you think it's the best story.
Let me say, I mean, the Kansas City Royals in 2015, that's gotta be up there, because the teams that I've seen win that I remember in my lifetime that like I'm like, wow. The '04 Red Sox, but they were a juggernaut. They did have the great story. The '16 Cubs, juggernaut. But the Royals were not. And like the Royals when I was a kid, and I think to most baseball fans, like they don't even think about it. Like I couldn't even imagine the Royals being good because they were so horrific every year. I mean, they weren't just like a team with a losing record most of the time. Like they lost 100 games every year, over and over and over and over and over again. And so when they magically became good, and they did it in a style that was like the antithesis of how baseball teams win in this era. They didn't strike out, they didn't walk, they stole a bunch of bases, and they actually were kind of the first to utilize the bullpen in a specific way. But like nobody won like that, and they did it, and they won in these crazy ways. Like the wild card win over the A's. Obviously, they lost in 2014 after that in like a really heartbreaking fashion. But they had this like super likable team, and like guys who were big prospects and kind of failed at first and got written off, like Hosmer and Gordon and Moustakis, and like had figured it out together. And they were daring, like they traded for James Shields when everyone thought that was a stupid trade to get rid of Will Myers. And the team itself was so likable. And I was sitting there watching them, again, they beat the Mets in 2015. And I was like, how could I not appreciate this style of baseball and the fact that they're having catches with fans in the outfield before the game, and they're paying for bar tabs or for Royals fans after the game. And again, for like a city that like has great fans and loves baseball and football, and obviously I love that city. Like they had that really special connection that's really rare. And the fact that like nobody, like they were winning these games that in a style that nobody was replicating. Like when you have a champion, everyone tries to replicate that champion. Nobody has replicated the Kansas City Royals because it just was a really special team that played this, like, in retrospect, like not necessarily smart style of baseball, or at least what we think is smart. And they were daring and they were fun. That is, I think, my favorite champion. Certainly, I think an underdog, because I think people kept thinking they would lose, kept thinking they wouldn't even make the playoffs, and they captured that's. I think I wrote like a Facebook status, and at the time I was like, I just want to thank the Kansas City Royals for like, just even though I'm not a fan, it just like that team made me love baseball so much, and I think qualified for all the things you're looking for in an underdog. So like, you think of like the underdogs of the classic college basketball teams, right? Like the Butlers of the world. They're amazing. NFL wise, it's hard to think of like an underdog. I know the Ravens one is like a 6 seed, and the Giants. The Ravens one was pretty cool. Ray Lewis's last stand. Basketball wise, there's been so many of the same teams winning. The Warriors, they're great to watch though, man. But baseball, we've got those underdogs, and the Royals, I think, probably one of my favorite teams of all time. Those two teams.
Scott, I want to thank you so much for having been on today's episode. It was a great pleasure to chat with you about Jacksonville sports, traveling all across the United States of America, and getting to know more about the behind the scenes of what life is like as a broadcaster and the different things that go into the work and what makes it so fun.
Thank you so much. It was a great conversation. I appreciate you having me on.
And thank you to the listener for enjoying today's episode with play-by-play broadcaster of the Jacksonville Jumbo Shrimp, Scott Kornberg.